All right, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming today. My name is Linda McMullen, and I am the Ely R. Callaway Senior Associate Professor of Management and International Business. That's a mouthful, but I'm glad to hold that position. And I teach in the business department and have taught full-time since 2004. I was actually here in 1999. I was hired to be the director of the evening college program and had a chance to teach as an adjunct for a couple classes and found that that was my real calling. That's what I loved. And so I went talked to the VP and said, I think I'm really supposed to be teaching. And he gave me that opportunity. And I have been teaching in the business department now full time for 17 years. I teach the Foundations in Business, which is one of our gateway courses. I also teach in the Common Business Core courses, including management and organizational behavior and cultural aspects of international business. And I teach the course that I'm going to tell you about today, our capstone course, which is social entrepreneurship. And I will mention that I also teach in the Ethos program, our general education program, a course that all incoming first-year students take that we have called Cornerstone. And I enjoy keeping my hand in the core as well. So let me tell you a little bit about why I chose the title that I did. I had no idea. That was on purpose, helping students imagine the integration of economic and social value creation. And the reason I chose that is because I have always felt that I'm the most effective in the classroom when by the end of the semester, students have gotten that message. Now, they never will say, I had no idea, but in so many ways, that's what they're saying. If they say to me, I hadn't thought about that, or you know what, I just realized, or I just considered, that's that moment that I am looking for. That's the aha moment that makes teaching so rich. And I think the important thing is it's not just rich for teachers, but the awareness of the fact that when students reach that point, they have learned something that really matters and that will stick with them. And usually when students come into the department, they don't have any idea about all of the possibilities out there. And so our job as teachers in the business department is to help them engage in ways that they really didn't think was possible before they started working with us. This capstone course encourages all of those aha moments. And so I'm going to share with you a little bit about how we teach, tell you about myself and the reason I do the class the way I do. I'm a storyteller at heart. Anybody who really knows me knows that I am a storyteller. And in the capstone class, I get a chance to tell really interesting, engaging stories about enterprises that have worked really well and help explore with students so that they can develop their own stories about social and economic value in many different environments. What I love about this class is the projects that students develop are not some pie in the sky can't be achieved projects. They are thoughtful, reflective, but practical ideas and proposals that really could be launched as an entrepreneurial venture. What I'm going to cover is from Milton Friedman to the Business Roundtable, talk a little bit about today's students, the challenge and the awesome opportunity of working with Gen Z, going to talk about the specific model for the marketing and entrepreneurship concentration piece of our business major, and then share with you the process that encourages students to imagine the connections between economic and social value creation. And then I will share just a couple of exemplars with you before we conclude and I open it up for questions. This is a really good time, I think, for us to think as a group, as ACBSP, as a group about Milton Friedman and about the theme for ACBSP, which is developing business leaders for a better tomorrow. Last September was the 50th anniversary of Milton Friedman's New York Times editorial, and I've referenced it here on this slide. His premise was that CEOs were in essence employed by the stockholders, and while they could certainly engage in what he called charitable work, they had to do it on their own time as principals. They were not to do it as agents for the businesses that they led. In fact, he thought, and I'm going to read a quote, he thought that issues such as employment, eliminating discrimination, avoiding pollution, and whatever else may be the catchwords of contemporary reformers, end quote, were simply not the purview of the corporate arena. He believed that engaging in issues of that nature was akin to spending someone else's money to pursue social issues. Now, that's understandable because that was 1970. It's a different time. We've come past that point now where we no longer think of social responsibility as pure and unadulterated socialism. 50 years later, we have the Business Roundtable, which is one of the most significant business organizations that we have. And I won't read all of this, but look at that first sentence there. Each of our stakeholders is essential. The operative word there is stakeholders, because prior to this time, we talked about stockholders, people who had invested money. Now we're thinking stakeholders, totally different. We not only have the Business Roundtable in this statement signed by 181 CEOs almost 2 years ago, we have the World Economic Forum. And let me read a quote from what the chair of the World Economic Forum said in December 2019. The purpose of a company is to engage all of its stakeholders in shared and sustained value creation. In creating such a value, a company serves not only its shareholders, but all of its stakeholders, employees, customers, suppliers, local communities, and society at large. A company acts as a steward of the environment and material universe for future generations. Who would have imagined even a few years ago that we would be championing that type of business philosophy or expressing that level of social consciousness? Well, here's why we are. Here's what's changed. If you look at the bullet points, you'll see a lot of the things that are really important now to businesses that were not so important years ago. And if you look at that Venn diagram, what you see here is that we now understand, executives of businesses now understand that there is an alignment between shareholder financial objectives, company financial objectives, and community stakeholder objectives. And so what we attempt to do in the business department here at LaGrange College is to teach that stakeholder capitalism model so that they will be educated and prepared to engage differently when they enter the workforce. Now, I told you about the roundtable, about the World Economic Forum. I don't want you to think that everybody agrees with that philosophy, because they don't. Harvard professor and economist Dr. Gregory Mankow wrote in July 2020, CEOs are qualified to make profits, not lead society. And he indicates that with regard to focusing on anything other than profit maximization, corporate executives with their business training and limited experience don't have the skill sets to play any other role. In a New York Times editorial, he stated that he's not opposed to prioritizing social programs, but he believes the seat of that work should be government, not corporations. And Dr. Karthik Ramana, business and policy professor at Oxford, published an article in the California Management Review that supports that position. He says we are on a slippery slope when businesses focus on non-market problems, and he maintains that corporate attention in social arenas will hasten the decline of already ineffective public institutions. Now, I understand both of those scholars' positions, but I disagree with the notion of should not. Businesses inhabit communities. They are a major, vital part of both local and national communities, and they have a responsibility to contribute intentionally, either directly through entrepreneurship inside of established corporations, or through partnerships with other sectors. According to the National Center on Educational Statistics, published in an Aspen Institute report on March 2020, 1 in 5 undergraduates in this country majors in business. 1 in 5. We absolutely can provide business academic training to prepare graduates who think more broadly and who understand how to be effective in areas beyond profit maximization. So let me share with you our mission statement for the business department here. We have for a number of years said that we want students to be able to navigate business and social enterprises, and we have focused on not just profits, but improving lives at the local, the region, or even the global level. For students who are taking this course that I'm going to tell you about today, they have already had an introduction through Entrepreneurship 3000, through an entrepreneurial lab, and even in Foundations in Business, which is where they start their program. These are all building blocks to help get to the point where they can successfully complete Entrepreneurship 4200. And as a part of that building block process, I always reintroduce Milton to my foundation students. They look at it and they look at the year and they think it has no value whatsoever. But then we start to talk about it and it helps them see how business used to be thought of, what the environment of business was then, what the environment of business is now, and why we have to do things differently than the way we have historically. So, I've been teaching for a while, long time. And while it is true that each generation has characteristics that distinguish them from other generations, it's also true that the same challenges reoccur, whether or not you were teaching Generation X, Generation Y, or Generation Z, what we call the iGen, if you were in an undergraduate classroom. Faculty still have to do these three things, and they are both challenges and opportunities for us. We have to help students understand that it's not either or. One of the most frustrating things is when we have students who will say, I'm going to do this and go into the corporate world because I can make a lot of money and I can flourish. And their assumption is that if I go into a business that is socially responsive or mission-based, I'm going to struggle financially. And that not either or, that philosophy is something that we try to get rid of because it really isn't a question of that. It's a question of both and. And so we start when students first come and sometimes have to help them rethink ideas perhaps that they got from home and help them appreciate that that's a false dichotomy. We want to teach students to appreciate their own circle of influence. You don't have to grow up to be Elon Musk. Now, if you do, I would absolutely love it if when I retire, I can tell in my retirement home, I taught so-and-so and he is now running this huge corporation. I would love that. And there will be some people who are titans of the industry, but it's not critical. As long as they are managing the influence in whatever circle they have in their enterprise, whether that's local or regional or national, that's what matters. And I want them to appreciate the value of that influence within their circle, no matter what the size. And then the third challenge and opportunity is to encourage students to imagine a different world than that they see and that they inhabit right now. Interestingly enough, I've done a lot of reading on Jean Twenge, who is one of the experts on generational issues, and she writes a lot about the iGen. And one of the things she says is they are supremely confident in their own abilities, and yet they don't see themselves using those same abilities to be change makers in the business world. And that's one of the things that we want to work on. The skills are there. We want to show them how to be those change makers. So when I start my course, it's always offered in the spring. When I start the course, I introduce companies that have to do with clothes, shoes, sports, games, or food, because that's what the students initially are interested in. Those are the companies that they are familiar with. And so we start asking questions, what are these companies doing that nurture economic growth and also social value? We do not use a textbook in this class. We use lots of resources from the library, lots of chapters from ebooks, but we don't buy a textbook. One of the reasons is that things change so quickly. The textbooks are often almost outdated in the business world before they come out, so we use current materials whenever we teach. Let me give you just a few examples of the ways that we help, teach, and encourage. I talk with them about Allbirds. I don't know if you've heard of that company or not, but Allbirds uses recycled plastic for the shoelaces in their sneakers. They use recycled cardboard for their packaging, and the wool in their products is harvested with an eye toward animal welfare and land management. We talk about Patagonia. I used to talk about Tom's shoes a lot, and I stopped last year only because I suddenly realized that when Blake started his one-on-one model, the students in my class were 7 years old, and so it didn't really have the meaning for them that it had for me. I occasionally introduce it as a cautionary tale because of the success at the beginning and the failure at the end. We spend a lot of time talking about Greyston Bakery in New York, one of 3,500 B Corps members that combines purpose with profit. And we talk about them because they have an open hiring policy. That's a critical way to create social value. They focus on the future, not the past. So if you come in to apply for a job there, they don't want to know if you have a criminal record. They don't want to know about the other jobs that you have had. If you are willing, they will give you a chance to work for them. And it has been a very successful model and is now being used in other companies across the world. And I introduced that one because students are often really hesitant when I ask them, what do you think about open hiring? they think that there's a huge risk involved. And so part of our thinking is, all right, expand your thinking a little bit. Think about the change in terms of social value and quality of life of people who have a bad past but have changed, now have an opportunity to have a real future and to work. Think about what that means. We introduced Homeboy Industries out of Los Angeles for the same reason, because that group is a for-profit, nonprofit, hybrid that works almost exclusively with former gang members to help them get a fresh start, to give them jobs, to teach them how to interview, to take the tattoos off of their skin so that they'll be acceptable when they go to interviews. These are ways that we create social value. And we always examine Just Capital's ranked list, where the students see companies like John Deere and Target and Procter & Gamble and Microsoft, and they see that you can look at companies in a number of different ways. And this organization, a nonpartisan research organization, examines companies based on customers, shareholders, workers, communities, and the environment. Again, this is another way to help students see both and instead of either or. So when you start my course, after we introduce the syllabus, and we have maybe 1 or 2 days to get to know each other, we start right away with the problem solving and introducing this concept proposal. And this is the way we do it in stair steps. The first thing that they will do after they do a little bit of research is write a problem statement. And obviously, to write a problem statement, you have to know about the history of the issue in which you're interested. They usually start with 2 or 3 different things they might want to explore, and they narrow it down to the one that will work best for them. You need to know why it is important to tackle this issue right now, and if anybody else is doing it, and if they are, how are they doing it? And they need to think about investors or government partners or private partners, because resources are needed for any kind of entrepreneurial venture. So they write their problem statement. Once that is approved, then they do a draft mission and a vision for this hypothetical organization. Again, it has to be something that is practical, that can actually be accomplished, and that satisfies a real need. It can't be just something that is made up. It has to satisfy a need that they have identified through their beginning research. And as a part of that, they write a 25-word vision statement. It's important for students to be able to write a concise, accurate vision statement that says what the aspirations are for that organization. The next step, usually about the 4th or 5th week, they start doing interviews. That's been constrained a little bit because of COVID, but we have still been able to do some phone interviews. It helps if they talk with someone who is in the field or the industry that represents the problem that they are trying to tackle. It's good practice for them, helps improve their communication skills, but also more importantly, helps them think about the problem in a different way when they talk to someone who is actually doing the work in that area. After the interview, now all this time they're starting to write, they're putting pieces of their concept proposal together. They do their elevator pitch. We used to do it as a video elevator. This spring, I actually did it as an in-person elevator pitch, and I have the best time with this. I hope the students have as much fun with it as I do. But I stand in front of the room and one of them comes up and another person takes time, and the scenario is that they just happen to get into an elevator with me, and I am the head of whatever organization they are trying to get money from. And they have 2 minutes from the bottom floor till we get to the penthouse to tell me about their company and to make me interested enough that I still want to talk with them when the elevator doors open. So they give me their pitch. I usually just listen. I don't say anything. When we get to the top and the other student tells me that time is up, I either say to them, that sounds really interesting. Why don't you make an appointment with my assistant and we'll talk about this in the next few weeks? Or I say, that was really nice. Have a good day. If I say have a good day, they know they have to redo the pitch. Sometimes students have to do it 2 or 3 times before they get it to where I will say to them, come on down and let's talk. That's an important piece of this because entrepreneurs are marketers and you don't have much time to grab somebody's attention. And if you're looking for someone who holds the financial resources that you need to help launch your venture, you need to be able to do it right. Now, the other thing, you'll notice the arrow for the draft vision mission, the video elevator pitch, and the financial case that I'll talk about in a minute. These are also peer reviewed. It's really good practice for students to have to evaluate each other. And they do it in a way that is thoughtful and kind, but they might say to a student, I didn't really understand where you were going with that. Or that doesn't sound like the main problem. That sounds like another type of issue. It helps them and it helps the student. So I always have peer reviews for these steps in the process. Then they construct an ecosystem, which I will show you in just a minute. And then the last big part, probably the biggest part really, even more so than writing the actual paper, is where they make the financial case. And again, students are heavily involved. If I have 20 students in a class, they take turns. At any one time, I'll have 4 students who will represent either the C-suite decision makers or the division heads or the holding company lead group or a major foundation like Ford Foundation. They have to tell us in advance who their funder is, and they have to have researched it to pick a funder who would actually support their type of project. And they make a 20-minute pitch. It's a little nerve-wracking for some of the students, but they get good at it. They learn from it. And the students who are acting as the decision makers ask really good questions that help them as they are writing their proposal to tighten things up before they get to the point where they're writing their final proposal. And then the last step, obviously, is the complete proposal that they turn into me. This year we did research papers. In the past, I have done research papers, posters, e-posters. There are lots of ways that they can present their final work. As they work, they always keep these in mind. Now, this comes from a textbook written by Kickle and Lyons on social enterprise. And the authors talk about when you're doing anything, you have to think about competitive advantage, market potential, social potential, and sustainability potential. And the way they ask the questions are really good. What they're saying is, are the opportunities in these 4 areas strong or weak? So as the students are doing their research and going through this, if the market potential is weak because maybe the timing is off, then they know they need to think about something else. If the social potential is weak because there's no evidence that the community they're trying to help is really going to embrace this initiative, then they think about something else. So again, these are things that help them fine-tune the process so that they can do what they need to do and write a good, solid proposal that actually is actionable. I want to show you an example of an ecosystem. This is from Healthy Cities in Peru. We put this together as a class a number of years ago. And when students do an ecosystem for their own project, it is so instructive because now they can see all the connections that we have been talking about all semester. Now they see them on a sheet of paper. So you see the people you're trying to help. You see the ramifications of it. In this case, there was no garbage pickup. In the poorer areas of the city, garbage was lying in the streets. There was a culture of neglect. The direct beneficiaries were those 9 million people. Public health was interested in it because the risk of infections was so high because the conditions in the city were dirty. So they put this together for whatever their project is, and they see everywhere there is a connection. And they also see who they need to add to this ecosystem to make it work. Healthy City worked because they had huge financial support from Ashoka and Skoll Foundation and Schwab, so they need to know where their support's coming from. And they generate, now this is a nonprofit, but it generates income and it creates jobs. There were dozens of micro businesses that were generated as a result of this particular enterprise. So again, it helps students think through who's engaged, where are the links, which of those links are most important in order for this project to be successful. And so as they're working through, let me call your mind back to I believe I told you at the beginning, one of the things that we do is we looked at Fetzger Institute and Aspen Institute, and they said that in a social enterprise, you need to think about reframing the problem, collaborating, employing entrepreneurial skill, communicating effectively, and anticipating impact. Okay, Aspen Institute has been working for a number of years on ways to make businesses more responsible, but on ways also to help institutions that teach business to do it in a way that is more responsible and more intent on thinking about businesses' roles as citizens within the community. And so that's where this comes from. We do this in our class. The students reframe and they collaborate. They learn to communicate effectively as they are developing their entrepreneurial skill, and they have to anticipate the impact because we ask them if this is sustainable. We say to them, five years from now, where will you be? 10 years from now, do you think you would be here And if you are here, what do you have to do to be successful, to maintain 10 years from now? So we go through this entire process. And the example is what Nessie calls a high impact practice, right? Where they really do a hands-on project for a capstone that hopefully has a lasting impact. Let me share with you just a few examples of what students have done the last few years that show me that I think we are on the right direction and we are indeed teaching about economic and social value. We had a young man who was a business major and a math minor, and he really was not interested in social entrepreneurship. It was a part of the capstone. He had to take it for his concentration. But he said to me, Dr. McMullen, I don't know about this social enterprise stuff. And so I said to him, you don't have to design a social enterprise. What you do have to do is design an enterprise that has social value. So he worked all semester on a maglev train that would be started in Atlanta, that would travel between Atlanta and Charlotte, and then between Charlotte and Charleston, and then finish the triangle and come back to Atlanta. And he had worked it out for the first leg that they were going to build. The cost would be 3 cents a mile, well, once it was up and running. Fantastic job. I had a young man who was an exchange student from Japan, and he had a person in his family who had some issues as she was getting older. And so his idea was a cafe or a restaurant that was staffed by challenged senior citizens working in tandem with younger people who were not challenged. And he wanted to improve their happiness quotient while making money and improve the quality of life for those seniors. And in this spring, I had a student who did a project called Container Construction. His brother happens to be in construction. He lives in Bartow County, Georgia. And he said that the cost of homes was getting so high that it was prohibiting people from buying homes, or it was tying them up with exorbitant mortgages for 30 years. And he thought that there should be an option for that. So his project would help in a number of ways. His plan is to build cost-effective, sustainable homes in a specific region in Bartow County that would lower the number of renters, increase home ownership, but not tie them to 30-year mortgages, because the homes would cost on average $100,000 to $125,000, which is about $100,000 less than a lot of homes cost in that area right now. It was a very thoughtful, well-researched project that could actually be accomplished. So these are 3 examples of things that our students have identified that show that they do understand the intersection of economic and social value for the business world. This is a quote from a book that I used to use called How Social Entrepreneurs Spread Innovation, and I happen to love the quote. And I think it's really true. And what we try to tell our students is it's not that anything is not possible, it's where are you going to place your commitment. If you're going to be a social entrepreneur, to what community are you going to be committed? If you're going to be a small business owner, what are you going to be committed to besides the product or service that you supply? And if you're going to work in a corporation, what entrepreneurial ventures are you going to recommend, support, and nurture so that you're taking care of the community and not just the financial objectives of the business? We can do these things. We just need to commit to do them, and it's highly possible. And I think that's how you develop better business leaders for today's world. And I thank you for your attention. And I'm going to stop sharing my slideshow and ask if you all have questions.
Okay, I'll ask one.
Go ahead, Carol.
Okay, you can hear me. I was just curious, with your students, how many of them come in with maybe that either or attitude and then they change as the course progresses?
Almost all of them. We have a lot of students who, when they start, they will say to me, I want to major in business. My dad says I can make really good money if I do that. And so that's what they think. And it isn't until they see some examples of people who are making good money, but they are doing things in a socially conscious way, that they appreciate that you can do both. And what I usually try and do is find really young folks who are successful doing that. Because if I show the older folks that have been doing it for 30 years, that doesn't really mean as much. But if I can show them someone who's 25 who's already doing it, then that makes a difference and they start to change the way that they think. What other questions do you have?
Linda, I have a question or two, actually.
Okay.
So you had the slide with the stair steps.
Uh-huh.
And you kind of talk about coaching these students through these different steps. And clearly you put a lot of thought into how you approach these students and how you work with them. So what happens when you have a student that is cut out for exactly this, that knows how to do it almost intuitively and loves it? I mean, what's your next step when you push them out of the nest?
Well, I let them go and I say, all right, what are you going to do to make this happen? I actually had a student this time, and he was not in our concentration. He just took the course because he had extra time to take the course. And as he developed the project, which was for assisted housing for students, for children who were mildly disabled, with the thought that as the parents get older and either cannot take care of, or perhaps they pass on, the children still need somebody. The young people, sometimes they're adults by this time, they need some place where they can be safe and happy and engaged. And so he developed his project around that with a housing complex. And he said, Dr. McMullen, when I get the money, I'm going to do this. He said, I really want to do this. And so we had a talk about who he would approach, what agency he would approach to get started, and how he would have to work with. One of the things they have to learn is, if you're going to do anything like that, you need the government's cooperation, you need the local neighborhood's cooperation. You have to get a lot of folks to embrace the idea, no matter how good it is, before you can do it. So we said, all right, you start here, you talk to these folks, you get some people on your side. Then you go here, then you go there. So on occasion, I do have students like that they get it, and they know exactly what they want to do, and it's wonderful. When that happens, it's wonderful.
I think it was really cool that you had an example, like you clearly knew of cases where that had gone so well that you had one off the top of your head that you were really impressed with. I think that's cool. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other questions?
I have one for you, Linda.
Sure, Kelly.
So this kind of piggybacks off of John's question, but have you had any students come back and say that they have then taken steps once they have graduated and they have gotten jobs into kind of making these a reality, or done maybe like a spinoff from them?
Well, the two I can think of are actually in school first. There's a student who I can't remember her exact title, but it's like a fellow position with the United Methodist Church, and it's a 2-year appointment. And when she finishes that, her intent is to go to South America. Her project was to design a program to eliminate what we call toxic charity, right? The idea that sometimes you give money and you give money, or you send people down. You send people, for instance, from Atlanta to a country in South America to work for 2 weeks, and they come back home. And long-term, that doesn't work, and it doesn't really help people who are there. So she has a project designed where she would go down and help people develop the skills themselves, so that rather than having somebody come in here and build houses for 2 weeks, everybody there is trained. They can build the houses. She has an interim plan so that people would still come down during that time. But her idea is to free, that the best way, you think about what they call base of the pyramid. The best way to make changes is you start with the people who are in the communities that need help, and you give them the skills so they can do it themselves. And that's her idea. And I do believe that our second graduate, Clayton, CJ Lord, will probably do the same thing. He's in seminary. When he gets out of seminary, he had some absolutely cool ideas also related to housing in communities where the rentals are really high because people can't afford the housing. And I have no doubt that when he's through, he's going to do that.
That's awesome.
Yeah. It's, it's just, it's invigorating. I love all the courses that I teach, but this one is particularly invigorating because they're seniors. They've had all the others, they get it, and they're ready. And they ask different questions and they think differently. And it's just very rewarding to teach that course.
I have another question since you
Sure.
said that. So in any of your, I guess, intro level courses, is this mentioned? And, if it is, have you, and you see those students again in this class, have you seen any changes in the way they think, not just within the class themselves, but maybe over time?
Definitely. Because we're a small department, if they go through the major, they get me at least 3 times. So I probably see them in foundations where they're brand new and are just learning about how to work in teams. And I get them in organizational behavior where they have to think about the psychology of business. And then I get them again. And what I see mainly is that they have started to open their eyes. Students come, they've been home, their main influence have been parents. A lot of them have not done any travel. So wherever their home community is, that's where they have been. And so sometimes we see a narrowness of ideas just because they haven't had the chance to experience something different. By the time they get to be seniors and they've had all the courses that LaGrange offers and maybe traveled and done all kinds of other things, maybe done an internship, they're thinking differently. The internships are particularly helpful when they're all of a sudden out working with a business where results really matter and you show up on time and you think through problems and you solve problems. By the time I get them as seniors, they're different. They really are different. And they're anxious. They're anxious to finish and get out and do something, which is a good thing. Yeah.
I have a question that piggybacks on that idea of change over time, but it kind of goes back to this idea of the different generations of students. So you talked about the iGen or Gen X, and you've been teaching for a lot of years. So I wonder if there has been a change in the kinds of trends, the projects that they like to do. Has that changed a lot over time? And what would you say is like the big trend right now?
The only thing that has changed is the exemplars that I use when I'm introducing things to get things that are current for this group of 18-year-olds. All students seem to like hands-on projects, and it's, I think, less important, especially in the early classes, what that project is than the fact that they can get their hands in and do something. It might be something really easy. We do some building exercises and foundations where, the Marshmallow Challenge, we do that. One year in class, I brought in some blocks and put them in groups and said, all right, build something. And what they didn't know was we were watching to see who is the leader, who's the follower, who's participating. It doesn't really matter what the activity is. It's the hands-on that they get. Business curriculum has a lot of terms, a lot of definitions. Those are hard for students and they tend not to remember those. But when they're doing the work, then all of a sudden the terms make sense. So yeah, so I have not really changed my projects. I just changed the examples that I use when I'm teaching so that I don't sound like I'm as old as I am, so that they'll know I know something about what's going on today. Any other questions? I appreciate you so much for doing this. This has actually been fun. I was really nervous when I started, but once I got started talking, I enjoyed this. Thank you for giving me your time and for asking good questions. And I appreciate you. And I'm going to sign off. So thank you. Bye.